Hi, good morning, everybody. Hopefully this is working. People can put in the chat if they can hear me. Something that would be great. All right, awesome. Thank you. Appreciate the response. Should we start, or is it worth waiting for a few more people to show up? Okay, I'll take your lack of responses. We're really keen to get on and learn about Agile, so we should start straight away. Well, good morning or good afternoon from your perspective. Really glad you guys are all. Oh, they just made an announcement for hackers. All right, maybe I'll wait a few more minutes then. Good morning. If you just joined, we're just giving people a few more moments to come in. Okay, I think that'll do. Let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon. Really glad you all could be here. Going to talk to you this morning about Agile software development. I've called this talk Understanding Agile because really what I want to focus on here is a lot of the principles and the concepts behind Agile. The reason I want to focus on that is with a lot of the engineers I've worked with, I've noticed they come in, especially the younger engineers, and they really understand, the practices and the rituals of Agile. They know how to point tickets. They know all about like sprints, but they don't really understand at a deep level like why we actually do that. It's just sort of this weird esoteric ritual we have to go through. So today I really want to go through sort of like the thought behind Agile and why it's actually structured the way it is. So a little about me to start off with. My name's Luke. I'm director of product management at a company called Eat Club. Eat Club is a food ordering app that's in the business space. Really, our focus is on doing individual meals at scale. I joined Eat Club 3 years ago when it was still a startup, and we got acquired last year by the Compass Group. Also, just want to mention my tech story a bit because a lot of young people ask me like how to get into products. So I graduated college like way back in the day with a degree in history and absolutely no idea about what I wanted to do. I'd always loved tech, loved working with computers, but I didn't really have the confidence to think I was smart enough to be able to do it for a living or work in the industry. So I had a couple of temping jobs at one place. I noticed hey, humanities major in the house. One place I worked, I noticed were doing all the analytics in Excel and all their reports sucked. So I just started going around making all the reports better because it was a boring job. I obviously did a good enough job at this that they hired me as a data analyst, even though I had no clue how to be a data analyst. So I thought I'd better learn how to do it. So I started teaching myself SQL, then R, and that bled into Python, got like more and more into coding. Eventually got good enough that they moved me over to being an engineer. So I was an engineer for a while, and that's when I started getting involved in product, finding out what product managers did, and it seemed awesome to me. So I was able to transition into being a product manager, and I absolutely loved it, and I've been doing it ever since. So I just want to mention that because there's a couple of takeaways. I think one, like you don't have to be a complete genius to work in the tech industry. Two is you can get really far if you're just curious and you're always willing to try new things and try and pick up new skills. Then, like lastly and probably most importantly, if you're not sure what you want to do, like don't freak out. Like I didn't have a clue what I wanted to be until my mid-30s. You have plenty of time to figure it out. So relax. All right. So enough about me. Let's talk about Agile software development. So if you look up Agile, online, say what the hell is Agile, you probably find something like this. Agile is a software development methodology. So methodology just means it's a series of guidelines and best practices that focuses on iterative delivery and flexibility. So it sounds kind of weird, right? Iterative means we're going to go through and do things multiple times, and that sounds really hard. Why would we do that? Why don't we just do things once? Well, back in the day, that's what we used to do. So you can't really talk about Agile without talking about what preceded it. That was Waterfall. And Waterfall is much more the sort of traditional project management structure that you might intuitively think of. So the system here is you had a couple of characters. You had generally business analysts, and their job was to go out and talk to the customers and talk to the business and figure out like everything the product had to do, across the entire board. And then they'd take all that information, they compile this into a huge document called the product requirements document, or PRD, and that would dictate absolutely everything that the product had to do from start to finish, right? Then they'd take that document and they'd hand it to normally a system architect or a couple of senior engineers, and then they'd take that document and make even more documents from that. So they'd create stuff like, system architecture, functionality modules, database schemas, like everything like that, like everything that the product had to do, like really broken down. Then all those documents would get handed to engineers, and engineers, they would just be doing their own little bit. They wouldn't really care about the system as a whole, but they would be coding to the document. So they'd take the document that detailed what their code had to do. They would code to that, sometimes called code into contract. As long as it did exactly what it said it had to do, as far as they're concerned, it worked. They'd hand that over to QA, who would test it. QA is quality assurance, if you don't know. And they would test, that all the individual components worked. Then they'd also test to the PRD to make sure the product did what the original document said it would do. Then finally, they'd take all that to a completely different team whose job it was to deploy that and maintain it on the server. Then throughout the entire process, you'd have a project manager, and their job was to really hold your feet to the fire and make sure like everybody was like getting the work done they had to do and like sticking to schedule and hitting targets, stuff like that. So like Waterfall's desperately uncool these days, and it's really fashionable to bash it, and I'll get to that momentarily. But it did do a couple of things really well, and it's worth sort of mentioning about what it did do well, because you need to know about it if you want to overcome any resistance and getting away from that sort of style of working. So like, first off, like a lot of people in the management loved it because, it was really, they had these big charts that told them exactly when to expect deliverables by, and they could see like clear timetables about when stuff was going to be done. A lot of people liked it because their job was really well defined, right? Everybody in this process knows exactly what they need to do to be successful, and exactly what the boundaries of the job was. There wasn't really a lot of crossing lanes between sort of different roles. But a lot of engineers really loved it. Engineers generally like to spend most of their time coding, generally don't like sitting in meetings. And this allowed them to do that because they would get a document, they would just tell them exactly what they needed to do. They could just go off, sit by themselves in a room and like churn out code. So if Waterfall was so great, why do we need Agile? That's an excellent question, Luke. Thank you for asking. Well, first off, like the way we buy software has fundamentally changed. So Waterfall was mostly used in sort of, the 80s and the 90s going through to the early 2000s. And it's a completely different world from what it was back then, right? Software used to be something you would drive to a store and you would pick up and you would physically buy. We don't generally do that much anymore. These days, the subscription model is much more common. Then even if you look at the subscription model with Agile, because you have these like big projects that take a long time, you have these like big release cycles. So there's inherent to that is a lot of risk. So you have to spend a lot of time testing stuff, because when you push in these big changes, there's a large chance you're going to take something. So some companies would take like months and months of just QA just to be able to do a release. It's highly risky. There's a big chance you're going to take the system down. And a lot of companies would actually do that on purpose. So you don't see it much anymore, but companies used to have like scheduled downtime for system maintenance. These days, that's pretty much unacceptable in most industries, right? Imagine if like Uber took their system down for a few hours to push an update, like loads of people would be stranded. It just wouldn't work. Then also with subscriptions, we don't have this idea really of being done, right? You're never really done building a product. So Google are never going to go, oh yeah, we're done building YouTube, like trying to move on to something else, right? You always want to be constantly updating it and pushing improvements. And lastly, but I think most importantly, like there's a greater need than ever to react fast to changing market conditions. So COVID's really highlighted that. We saw a bunch of businesses had to completely change the way they operate virtually overnight. Subscription models are great, but they make it really easy for people to switch. So, if DoorDash releases a new feature, Uber Eats customers aren't going to wait around for like 3 years for them to push an update. They need to respond really quickly and get something out the door. Another fundamental reason we don't use Waterfall so much before is that timetables are a really bad way of telling you if your product's actually being successful or if you're on the right track. So just think about sort of a problem, just think about a product that you really love. Take a moment, think about what you really love about that product. I guarantee very few people are going to say what I really love about this product is that all the developers hit their delivery timetables or that it was developed within budget, right? You probably love that product because it adds value to you, it makes your life better, it solves a problem, it allows you to do something you couldn't previously do. And that's really what our goal is in building software. The goal isn't just to put out code or even to ship products, it's to add value to the business and our customers. And the fundamental problem is, you can't tell that from a timetable. And it gets worse from there. Remember, in the waterfall process, we speak to the customers right at the beginning, get their requirements, and then we wouldn't have anything to do with them all the way until the end where we release it, and then we finally get some feedback. Well, if you look at this chart, it shows how expensive it is to make a change throughout that process. So at the start, it's really cheap to make a change because you haven't built anything yet. So if you're in the requirements gathering phase and change a requirement, who cares? Basically costs you nothing at all. By the time you've spent like weeks, months, or years building a product and you put all this work into it, making a change is really expensive because that involves not only throwing out a whole bunch of work you did, but then starting from scratch and rebuilding it. So let's say, for example, we're building an app that was designed for the elderly. We could design a beautiful UI that's really simple and easy to use, ship the whole thing. Then at the end, we might discover that, hey, the text is too small. People are having a hard time reading it, but the way we design the UI, we can't really increase the text size at all. That means we basically have to throw out the entire UI, start again from scratch, redesign the UI, build it, test it, and deploy it. It's a really inefficient way to build a product. So how is Agile different? So Agile, you have this new concept called a product backlog, and the backlog is basically just a prioritized list of all the work that needs to be done. So everything we need to do in the order we need to do it. What makes this different from Waterfall is that it's not static. You're going to be constantly updating it, adding to it, and reprioritizing it as information comes in. We also have much smaller release cycles. So typically between 1 to 4 weeks, we're going to release, and we are constantly deploying code. So that means we're constantly getting feedback on what we're doing. We're using that feedback to change our priorities, update what we actually want to build, update design, and an entire concept of what the product is. So there's many different flavors of Agile. This is an example of Scrum, which is a type of Agile implementation. It's the one I've used the most and probably the most common in the industry. So we can just go through sort of the process here. We got a couple of new characters. First off, you have a product owner or product manager. And really the value they add is that you have one person who's speaking to both the engineers and the customers. So instead of having to engineers having to look through documents and try and figure out from that what they think the customer wants, they had somebody they can talk to and have a conversation and really engage with them and figure out like what it is they need to build together. We also have a Scrum Master, and they kind of replace the project manager. But the big difference with Scrum Master is their job's not to dictate sort of like what work needs to be done or like hold people to accountable to deadlines. It's really they take the role of a coach. So their job's to remove roadblocks. It's to empower the team. It's to allow the developers to do their job better. So the process is, as I said, the product manager will define the product backlog. Then they have a meeting with the engineering team called like sprint planning, in which the engineering team will actually tell them how much work they think they can get done in the next sprint. So sprint's just sort of a small cycle in which we put work out in, and like I said, it can be between 1 to 4 weeks. So right up front, the engineering team will decide about how much work they think they can get done based off how much work they've been doing in previous sprints. Then you agree on what the sprint work is. That's called the sprint backlog. You'll go through the sprint cycle, in which during the sprint you'll be sort of meeting constantly. So normally we have like daily stand-ups where we just get together as a team and you discuss simply like what I did yesterday, what I'm doing today, and any blockers I have on. And product will normally be part of that. So you constantly have this communication, and engineers can ask questions, and you can like respond to like changes. Then at the end of the sprint, you get together and you talk about how you did. So sprints should have defined goals. You should have like, by the end of this sprint, we want to be at X point. So you'll look at whether or not you achieve that. If not, why not? You talk about anything you've done differently, and you use that feedback to actually incorporate and change the process. All right, is everybody with me? I'm talking a lot. I'll take your silences, yes. Okay, great. So there's 4 main like key principles to Agile, and I think it's worth going over them because I think they really like highlight, what's so different and what's so special about it. So the first principle is this: people over processes. So really, the idea behind that is the idea of like self-organizing teams. So Agile follows sort of a philosophy called servant leadership, where you basically say, hey, everybody's a grown-up. So like the job of the manager is not to like supervise the individual contributor. It's really to like be able to empower them to do their job. And to that end, like if you look at the Agile team structure, you've got, typically a product owner, you've got development team and Scrum Master. You'll notice that there's no actual manager on that at all. Neither the product owner or the Scrum Master have any direct authority over anybody on the development team. And there's a good reason for that. It's because we want to like separate out the managers and have them act as coaches to the engineers, and everyone else is just focused on empowering the team. So you have an engineering manager who sits outside this, and it's their job to do sort of performance appraisals and one-on-ones with engineers, but that doesn't actually happen within the Scrum structure, because you're trying to create a really open environment and give people the opportunity to explore and like try new things. Then the other thing that's really great about Agile is because we have this sort of short iteration cycle. We have these short sprints we're going through. It really does allow for experimentation. This is because like we're going to do everything in a small chunk, and then we're going to have a review session afterwards. So it allows you to like introduce new ideas. If something's not working, like you can change it. You can go crazy because you're going to find out really quickly if it's working or not. So don't be afraid to try stuff. Make sure you revisit that in your sort of sprint reviews. If it's not working, just modify it or just throw it out altogether. if it's a disaster, like you really haven't lost that much. Another real key principle of Agile is the idea of software or working software over documentation. So if you remember when I was speaking about Waterfall, like the sheer amount of documentation that put out, the problem with documentation is it's really bad at producing a shared understanding. And that's ultimately what you want. Otherwise, you end up having the team go sort of all separate ways. So Agile has this idea of a user story. And the idea behind that is instead of like listing out everything you want the product to do, you're really just trying to sell the story of an individual user so that an engineer understands it and they're able to not just make something that product's asking for, but also like you engaging the engineers to think about if you were that user, how would you deal in that situation, and how would you like solve that problem? So there's a common phrase that if you're only using your engineers for coding, you're only getting about 40% of their value out of them, and I completely agree. One of the best things I personally find with Agile is the team I work with are much smarter than I am. So it's really valuable to me that as a product manager, I don't come to them with, hey, this is everything I want to do. I come to them with a problem I'm trying to solve, and I have them work through it with me, and we come up with like solutions together. So in the past, I've had like engineers talk to customers. I've had engineers like go on like site visits with me. I've had them like multiple times do designs. I definitely have them like critique all the designs that come out from our designer, and like we then like iteratively improve upon them. It's really valuable to get that team involved and actually solving problems, because you end up with like such a better product as an end result. I'm really fortunate enough with the team I have that they're so keen to do new stuff that I'm always sort of like pushing back because I know we have to hit our targets. So like it was like, oh yeah, you're asking for this, but we can do this, we can do this. And they have to be like, all right, slow down. We're going to go through this iteratively. But you don't get that just with requirements document, right? You only get that if everybody like really understands what it is you're trying to build and you're working together to achieve that goal. Okay, collaboration over negotiation. So you remember with Agile, we had this strange system where we get customer feedback right at the beginning, then a really long time passes, and then we just get customer feedback right at the end. That's completely different Agile. So in Agile, you have customer feedback built in as a feature. So this can be done several ways. You can either just release stuff and talk to your customers, see how it works, or increasingly these days, analytics is more and more key. So you should build in analytics to everything you're building. You should set up before you ever start a project what the key performance indicators are, what metric you're actually trying to change, and then constantly as you're releasing new features, new software, you want to be looking at how it's affecting that metric and like using that to judge like whether or not you're going in the right direction. This is especially key on larger projects, ones that take several years, because there's no way you can wait that long to get any feedback. And like built into this is the idea that like customers are a key part of actually making your product better. You want to like incorporate them into the entire process. If you're in a business and your business has like key stakeholders that involve, such as marketing or sales or like people like that, you also want to treat them as customers and make sure they're coming to some of your meetings, so not just so they're aware of what's coming up, but so they can actively be giving their input and driving the direction of your product. And lastly, you have to be willing to adapt to change and throw out the plan if it's not working. So spoken a lot about getting input from customers and sort of like learning as you go, none of that is worth anything at all if you're not actually taking that data and using it to influence your decisions, right? So it's a really good idea to have a plan, but always be willing to abandon the plan if it's not giving you the results that you want. And this is actually, it sounds simple, but it's a really hard concept to get across to a lot of people, because still baked into a lot of people's attitude is the idea that, hey, if we do something and it doesn't work, we failed. Or if we go in a certain direction and we suddenly decide, the last sprint's work just wasn't working, we have to throw that out and start again, we failed in some way, and that was a mistake. And it's really hard to actually get people to understand that that's not always the case. If you tried something and it didn't work, you're in a better position than you were before, because you've learned something. You've learned that that's not the right direction to go in. And actually, it's really good that you learned that soon, because you could have spent another 6 months to work on this feature that wasn't going to work anyway. So it's a really difficult conversation to get across, especially like newer engineers and especially management a lot of the time. But that's the job of your product manager, and a good product manager will always sort of like see that as a positive. And remember, like, it's only iterative if you do it more than once. So if you're absolutely, David, if you're like going through your entire like roadmap and you're never making any changes, you're not doing Agile. And that's probably a sign you need to incorporate more feedback into your process. So yeah, that was pretty much what I wanted to talk to you guys about. I flew through that way quicker than I thought I would, because normally when I speak, I have lots of people interrupting me with questions, and you guys were very polite. Just a couple of resources though, if you want to learn a bit more about Agile or delve deeper into it. So like Scrum, the art of doing twice the work in half the time, was created by one of the founders of Scrum. It's a essential read, in my opinion. It really goes into in detail like the principles and how to apply them. Lean Startup by Eric Ries. It's not as specifically about Agile, but it really if you want to work in a startup, you should definitely read this book. In fact, if you want to work in tech in general, I would highly recommend this book. It's sort of like one of the staples of all sort of like the way modern tech companies work, and like every other book you're going to read about technology will probably refer back to this book at some point. So you really need to have like a deep understanding of like the principles and the methods he like lays out in it. And then if you want something a bit more practical, Scrum Mastery by Jeff Watts is it's really good. It's an easy read. He just goes through sort of lots of different stories and examples of where things go wrong in Agile, and how you take sort of a medium to low function Agile team and turn that into a really high functioning Agile team. All right. So that was about all I had to cover. So I'm happy to take questions if anybody's got any. All right, thank you. Anybody got any questions? Yeah, Lean Startup's definitely great. A lot of it's like product focused, but it's something I think anybody working in any part of tech would really benefit from going through. And it was when I first started working in tech, somebody told me to read that book, and I was like, yeah, whatever, I'll read it later. And then when I was struggling as a product manager and I first started, I finally got around to reading that book, and I was like, oh my goodness, all the answers, stuff I've been struggling with are in this book. Why didn't I read this like 5 years ago? Internship's been offered. Possibly. We're hiring for engineers at the moment at eClub. So look me up on LinkedIn if you're interested or know anyone that's interested. What did I do prior to tech? I had a number of different jobs actually. So I bounced around as as a temp for a while. I worked in customer service, which I thought was just a dead-end job. But one thing I've learned is it's all those jobs that you might have early on and you don't think actually give you any training that actually do add a lot of value. So I covered at the beginning how I sort of like transformed from sort of a temp to a data analyst to an engineer to a product manager. Where I was going with this was, that those early customer service jobs, just working in call centers, really taught me how to deal with people and interview people. And those have been having that skill base really allowed me to transition to being a product manager because I was really good at speaking to people. So I would say, the tech industry really requires people with diverse backgrounds. It's not all just hardcore engineers, though hardcore engineers are awesome as well. It's really people that can do a lot of things and talk to people are highly valued. Another question is, do you need technical skill to be a PM? It's a good question. I would say you need some sort of like understanding of technology, and the more understanding you have, the better it will be. But no, I know plenty of product managers. Some have a technical background, some don't. You can absolutely be an awesome product manager without having a technical background. Having said that, when a lot of young people come to me and they say, how do you get into product? One of the first questions I always ask them is like, do you know how to code? And if they say no, I say, go and learn to code. That's not because you need to be able to code to be a product manager. It's just to give you a better understanding of sort of how it works. A lot of the conversations you're going to end up having are going to be with engineers about engineering stuff. So having some base level understanding of that will help, but it really takes like so many different skills. Like you need to understand the business, you need to understand like user design, you need to understand sort of psychology. Definitely people from diverse backgrounds can be product managers. You don't have to be a technical genius. I am not a technical genius. Another question, I just started working as dev on an Agile Scrum team recently. What are some of the must-knows I need to master before going on to be more efficient on my team? I would say like, I'm just going to script forward. So there are a couple of like problems I've noticed come out a lot with Agile. The biggest one, sorry, I'm clicking the wrong thing, is probably like Scrumma. So this is a trap I see a lot of companies fall into a lot. Basically, it's Waterfall, but with like Agile means tacked onto it. So you're still doing sprints and you have a lot of, the same meetings like sprint planning, retrospects, all that, but you're not taking in feedback. It's the main thing. They're still doing all the requirement gathering up front. They're still making the big plan. They're going through it. They're just attacking it via sprints. And again, you can tell you're in one of those environments. If iteration is viewed as a failure, that's sort of a red flag. Likewise, if your sprints are too long, like it's between 1 to 4 weeks. In practice, I rarely see any company go above 2 weeks because you shouldn't be planning that far out in advance. And you should also be hitting your sprint goals. Like if you're constantly have like half your sprint overflow, not all the work's getting done, it's just going to the next sprint and going to the next sprint, going to the next sprint. That's a strong sign you're in Scrumma. You need to like get together as a team and figure out like why it's not working and like what you need to do to change it. Oh yeah, someone put I can throw my LinkedIn in here. Sorry, I should have done that. Okay, there's my LinkedIn. So if you guys have any questions or, just in general, or, especially if you have any specific questions or anything on anything, feel free to message me. Happy to respond. Likewise, if like, no one's looking for sort of like full stack engineering positions, like we are hiring. So please feel free to put them in touch with me. So, question here. One of the big issues is the decision of how long my task will take. How can I give my team a better expectation on progress, especially this is an excellent question, Charles. So I didn't really go into it in detail today, but one of the big parts of Agile, especially Scrum, is estimation. So typically in the sprint planning meeting, you'll go through the different user stories. Then the engineering team will together estimate how much work they think that's going to be, and that's typically done by judging the level of complexity of that ticket, and the team will vote on what we call like a point, which is like a number which just tells us like how complicated we think that ticket is. That's one of the hardest parts to get right in Agile. There are a couple of like guidelines to if you want to follow. Like first off, a big tendency people have is to try to view the point as an estimation of how long it's going to take. You don't want to do that. The way you want to do it is you want to use the points to judge like complexity. So typically what you would do is you'd think of just what's the simplest thing I can do? What's the simplest like thing that's still going to be considered a ticket that I could actually do? And that's 1 point. And then you think, right, what's the next sort of step up from here? What's like double the complexity of that? And that will be 2 points. And then you start following like the Fibonacci sequence. So then you go like 3 and 5, then 8. One of the big lessons I learned early in my career when we were constantly sort of like missing our targets and in this sort of like Waterfall mode was that it's really, really hard to estimate large tickets. So in our team, we have a rule that no ticket can be above 5 points. If a ticket is larger than that, it's too big, it's too difficult to estimate, and we need to break it. That's assigned to us. We need to break it down smaller. So we, like earlier, I was talking about like experiment, try and find the rules that work for you. That's a rule we put in, and it's worked really well. So we tend to be really efficient at getting out sort of like, you know, 3 points, even 5's a little large. So we try to break everything down into like 2 or 3 point tickets. Then 5's no, but really this is a special ticket, and we have to do it. But yeah, that's what we've done. The other bit of advice I would give you around estimation is it's really useful to look at what similar tickets were in the past. So when we estimate stuff, it's really easy to go through the best case scenario in our mind. And this is especially true when you're doing your sprint planning. You're looking at how much work you can take on. Like you might think, oh yeah, like next week I've got no meetings, it's going to be great. You're not thinking about how someone's going to be out of the office in a couple of days, or like how someone's going to throw a whole bunch of last minute meetings and you can't do. You're not going to get as much work done. So look at how much points you got down in the last few sprints. Look at your resources you have for the previous sprint, see if they match up, and make your estimations accordingly. Then I also tend towards, I don't want to set the team up to fail. So when we're talking through our goals for the sprint, I want to make sure those goals are achievable. The surefire way to make your team fail is give them more work than they can ever realistically do. So set goals, hold yourselves to them, but make sure you can actually achieve those goals. All right, that was a very long answer to your quite simple question, but it was a great question. Anything else? All right, cool. I think that'll do it then. Well, thank you so much for attending. Like I said, feel free to direct message me if you have any questions. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. Thanks, guys. This was awesome. Bye.